Hello everyone, I am Jonathan Little. Today we have another hand from a $3,500 bind tournament that I played in Florida recently. Here they fold around to a tight aggressive kid on the button who raises to 400 at 75 150 with a 25 ante. Now, when there is an ante in play, you definitely need to be defending somewhat frequently. And Jack 7 offsuit's not a great hand, but you have to understand, I have to put in 275 chips to try to win a pot that's going to be about 1,000. Or maybe a little bit more, about 1,100. So am I going to realize about 20 or 25% equity from out of position? And I think I probably will. Actually, I almost certainly will. Jack 7 is fine enough. If you get one pair, it's usually okay. Also, your opponent's not just guaranteed to blast off on all three streets, so you have to fold your marginal made hands a lot of the time. So this is a great spot to defend somewhat wide. If this was Jack 6 offsuit, I would not call. If it was 10-7, I would definitely call. 10-6 starts to become close again. So I'm calling in this spot a lot of the time. You may elect to 3-bet. I don't think this would be an insane 3-bet as a bluff, but certainly not mandatory. We flop a gut shot, which is pretty good. I could certainly lead on this board. If there were two clubs on the board, I actually think leading would be fine, because then we have a gut shot and backdoor flush draw and an overcard. That's actually a pretty strong draw. Here we don't have the backdoor flush draw, so it's a little bit weaker. Because it's a little bit weaker, I'm probably going to elect to check raise. And it may seem crazy to check raise with only a gut shot, but a gut shot and an overcard is actually pretty good. Even if this player has ace-10, we have plenty of equity. Think about it. We have 3 outs to the jack, and then we have 4 outs to the straight. So that is 7 outs total. That's going to give us something like 25-ish% equity on average, which is kind of a lot, right? So I'm okay check raising this hand. In this scenario, we do want to have some bluffs to raise. I may also not want to necessarily raise Queen Jack, because that's a hand that if I check raise and then the opponent re-raises, I have to fold, and that would be a bit of a disaster because that hand should have a lot of equity. So you often need to be looking for draws to raise, and the first draws to look to raise are gut shots and backdoor flush draws that may or may not have 2 overcards, depending on how the board runs out. I know that's a pretty horrible description, but gut shots are reasonable check raises, especially on boards that should be good for my range, and middle card boards like this often should be reasonable for my range. So I'm going to raise probably about 1,600 or so. When the opponent bets 625, I'm going to make it about 2.5 or 3 times that, and that is what I do. And the opponent calls. So when the opponent calls, first thing to note is that the opponent actually should call somewhat wide, because he has to put in 1,000 into a pot that's going to be about 4,000, right? This replayer's messing up on me. That's nice. Let's actually reset this hand. In that scenario, he had to put in 1,000 to win 4,000, so he actually should call pretty frequently. So knowing that, I am going to have to continue barreling with my hand a decent chunk of the time, right? So don't think that this is necessarily a check raise on the flop to give up on the turn. If I had a set or 2 pair and I check raised, I would definitely want to continue betting. So be aware that we're not just giving up. If you are going to check raise the flop and give up, you should often be betting much, or check raising much larger, because that's going to give you more fold equity. All right, here we are on the turn. Turn is a 5 of hearts. So I just mentioned I want to continue barreling. The problem, though, is now, if my opponent has any sort of made hand, he's going to be very unlikely to fold, because all of the draws missed, right? Also, I'm probably not check raising too many bottom pairs, although I may from time to time with stuff like 5-4 or 5-3 or 6-5, the particularly bad ones. So this is not a great card for me. The opponent could very easily have all those 5s I just mentioned, plus maybe ace-5 and king-5 and who knows what. So now, when the board pairs, I think this is a fine spot to check, looking to check fold. I would also check 10-9. I would probably also check ace-10 or king-10 if I elected to check raise those, which I may. So we're just giving up here. This draw has gone to complete garbage, but it goes check-check, so that's nice. River is the king of clubs. And now we have to decide if I need to bluff this or not. Well, I just told you I could have king-10 perhaps, right? So that's certainly a hand I want to value bet. I could also have ace-10, which I may want to value bet. I could very clearly have queen-jack, which I would like to value bet. I could also have king-jack and king-queen that I would like to value bet. Those are also gut shots. So I realize I just mentioned that I may not check raise queen-jack, but, you know, our opponent doesn't necessarily know that. So this is certainly a fine spot to bluff. You also want to think in this spot, what are my bluffs? And my bluffs here are definitely going to be Jack 7, Jack 8, 8 7, 8 6, and 7 6. So we do have a lot of bluffs available. You have to make sure you're not bluffing with all of them. And I may not check raise with 7 6 every time. I may not check raise with 8 6 every time. So we're somewhat protected by the fact that we don't necessarily have all of those hands in our range. But definitely, you want to make sure that you really do take time to look at your range away from the table to determine if you are bluffing too frequently. That said, this hand clearly has no showdown value, so if I am going to have some bluffs, this is a reasonable hand to go with. I do decide to bet 2,700. I may want to bet even larger than this. This is a spot where the opponent almost certainly doesn't have a 5, so whatever he has is going to be a marginal bluff catcher at this point. I just don't want to make a bet like 1,500 that may induce him to hero call, right? That would be a disaster. So I'm going to bet somewhat large. I could see certainly larger bets being fine. As you have more bluffs in your range, and I just listed a lot of them, like 64 combinations of them. As you have a lot of bluffs in your range, you want to typically bet bigger because that's going to put your opponent in a spot where he's... Well, you always want to look at your range and try to make it balanced. In this scenario, if I pot it, I can only have 2/3 value hands, 1/3 bluffs. Clearly, I don't have 128 value hands, right? I have very few. I have King 10, pocket 10s, pocket 9s, maybe pocket 5s, maybe some weird ace 5 or 6-5 or 7 or 6-5, 5-4. But again, I had to check all those hands on the turn, which probably isn't happening. So I really don't have very many value combinations. That's what I'm trying to say here. If I don't have very many value combinations, then I can't have a whole lot of bluffs. So just be careful with having too many bluffs in your range. And this is a spot where it is very easy to have too many bluffs in your range if you are check raising all of the gut shots on the flop, which is why you can't check raise with all the gut shots. Like I said, I'd maybe fold the bad ones. So anyway, 2,700. I actually would prefer a little bit bigger though. I think something like 4,000 would have been better. This time the opponent folds and we win a nice pot. So main takeaways here are that the turn was particularly bad for me, right? And this is a spot where I can't just blindly barrel off because if the opponent does have a 10 or a 9, now he's pretty much never going to fold. And when he calls my flop check raise, he probably has something. But when the river completes one of the very obvious draws, you certainly need to be going for it. But be careful because you may have too many bluffs in your range. So that's going to be it for this hand. If you enjoyed this, let me know on Twitter at Jonathan Little. Also, I have a poker training site, pokercoaching.com. You can go there and get a completely free trial for a week. And we have a lot of hand quizzes like this, except for I'm asking you what to do instead of telling you what I would do. And also there are some pretty in-depth homework questions where I go through situations like this. I tell you to tell me how you're playing your range. And this might be actually a good quiz question. Should you be, like which hands should you be bluffing in this spot on the river? And which hands should you be value betting? And how do you balance that? Something we should all take some time to do. So anyway, check it out at pokercoaching.com. Thank you very much for being here. And I'll talk to you next time.